Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I know it's a busy week with the governor's May revise announcement coming on Friday, so we appreciate you taking time to hear from superintendents, school board members across the state about the issues that they're facing in California public schools, as well as the opportunities they can give to students if there's an appropriate level of investment from the state in the proper areas to support and to serve our public school students. Nobody knows better than some of the leaders we have here today, so it's going to be a special conversation. I'd like to introduce our panelists to you. First off, we have Dr. Susan Heredia, CSBA president and also a trustee in the Natomas Unified School District. A trustee in the Davis Joint Unified School District is Thomas Adams, who's joining us today. We are also joined by Maggie Beauvais-LaMonica, a trustee in Hermosa Beach City School District, and Jeannie Fernandez, a trustee in the West Sonoma County Union High School District. Also with us today are Robert Garcia, trustee in Jurupa Unified School District, and Jeff Harris, superintendent in Newark County Unified School District. And last, but certainly not least, Darshan Patel, a trustee in the Poway Unified School District. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we hear from the rest of our panelists, there will be a short statement from CSBA President, Dr. Susan Heredia.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking time to join us this afternoon for this very important conversation in which we will discuss some critical issues related to our schools and the students that we serve. As Troy mentioned, the governor will announce his May revised budget later this week, and this is always a big time in school districts and the state because schools are trying to figure out how much money they're going to get from the state and how that will impact the resources and the programs that they have in place to serve their students. This year, however, is especially important. Although it seems we have weathered the worst of the pandemic, we will be experiencing its aftermath, as many as you know, for some time to come. So consequently, we must respond in a way that both recognizes the magnitude of the challenges before us. And we also must seize the opportunities we have to continue improving our schools for the students that we serve. I just want to highlight real quickly a few of the topics that will be discussed today. And as Troy mentioned, LCFF, we can't do everything that's necessary to serve our students unless we dramatically increase the base funding available under the local control funding formula. Many of you already know this, but I think what it is just to keep that message out front so the public understands that by increasing the base funding beyond the required cost of living adjustment, then we'll be able to provide for students at a time of unprecedented needs. So the public and all of you have heard much about COVID ADA relief, but it's equally important that the May revise takes strong measures to address declining enrollment. And this is just something that's hitting many school districts, or the majority of our school districts in California. So CSBA's priority is to ensure that any adopted plan recognizes the devastating impact the pandemic has had on school attendance. Specifically, we're requesting COVID ADA relief where the attendance percentage and LAA generated in the 2019-2020 school year can be used in calculating the attendance component of the apportionment, as the 2019-2020 was the last normal year prior to the pandemic. And then pension relief. I think we've heard a lot about this, but it's one of critical topics here. While the LCFF base funding and declining enrollment have received attention to this point, an issue that has so far been left unaddressed in budget negotiations is continuing pension relief for school employers. The explosive rate of pension increases and the burden this has placed on schools is a state-created crisis that demands a state-funded solution. School districts did not set the rates, nor did we have a vote in the decision. It's the state's obligation to fix this problem. And so CSBA is urging the governor and the legislature once again to commit non-Proposition 98 general fund allocations to help LEAs cover a portion of the employer contribution to the CalSTRS and the CalPERS systems in the short term. And also to utilize the state budget surplus to buy down the unfunded liability of the two systems. And finally, there is the home to school transportation. Another critical K-12 budget subject is it impacts other major issues. I mean, you think like it impacts enrollment, attendance, academic progress, and access to services that support students' physical and mental health. And more than ever, getting students to class every day and on time is critical, helping students make up the moments lost during the last 2 years of stress, isolation, and learning disruption. Yet, due to severe underfunding of home to school transportation programs, California ranks last nationally in the number of students bused per capita, with only 1 in 10 students taking a bus to school. The best solution to this situation is Assembly Bill 2933, which reimburses schools for 100% of busing costs, including training, hiring, and retaining bus drivers and maintenance staff, buses, and shortage and other infrastructure. AB 2933 would provide school districts with both the funding and the flexibility to best serve their students without taking away from other programs, also in desperate need of resources. And its principles should be reflected in the final budget. And then TK facilities. As schools look ahead to the expansion of transitional kindergarten, funding is needed to ensure schools have adequate facilities to serve these new students. This additional funding and flexibility will be critical to ensuring that LEAs can fulfill the state's goals for TK expansion and serve their new students. The governor's budget proposes $2.3 billion in additional school facilities funding over the next 2 years. However, more is needed as LEAs race against the clock to construct and prepare facilities. TK requires specialized classrooms with additional requirements for minimum square footage, in-classroom restrooms, separate play yards, proximity to drop-off and loading areas, and even the height of the furniture for these little ones. As we add a new grade to public school, it's important that we do it right and provide the next generation of California students with a strong foundation and a nurturing physical environment. Now, I'm going to turn it back over to Troy. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. We appreciate that overview of the key budget priorities that offer the highest leverage investments in public schools at this time. And it's important that the May revise reflect those areas because those are the areas where we can make some of the greatest differences in support of students. Again, those areas are raising the base LCFF funding, pension relief, COVID ADA relief, TK-12 facilities expansion funding, and also home to school transportation funding. We're going to dive into each of those issues one by one with a local perspective, starting with LCFF base funding. So to speak on that topic first, I'd like to welcome Tom Adams from the Davis Joint Unified School District.
Hi, I'm Tom Adams, and I was at one time a deputy superintendent at the California Department of Education. So let me give you a perspective on why it's important to increase the base. That's important because it actually gives local leaders like myself the ability to respond to local needs. And when you think about it, when you increase the base, you increase all services for all students, and you can actually, and all employees can benefit. One of the things I've experienced both professionally and personally at the local level is the transition to LCFF. And it really succeeds when the base is increased and you can actually do more in response to your local constituents. Keep in mind that people have increased their expectations about what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to be responding to the needs of our students. And we can only do that with an increase in the base.
Thank you, Tom. Next to speak on the issue of raising the LCFF base funding, we have Maggie Beauvais-Lamonica.
Thanks, Troy. Just to share a little bit about Hermosa Beach, we're a TK8 district with about 1,250 students, and really proud of what we're able to do with a small district. But we also have a $14 million budget. We're the lowest funded school in LA County and one of the top 10 lowest funded schools in the state. We also bear the distinction of having one of the greatest drops of enrollment during the pandemic of 12%. So with this current proposal right now of the base funding, we will still have $1 million deficit that we're looking at for next year. Having this base funding without tied to looking at rolling averages for enrollment, without increasing beyond the statutory 5.3% COLA doesn't help Hermosa Beach students. Currently at our funding model, we can't even afford the state required librarians. That comes to us through private funds and a loan from a neighboring district that happens to be a great neighbor. So for us, we desperately need the governor to relook how they fund schools, how they look at the base specifically, and then adjusting the base beyond the statutory requirement of the COLA. Right now, that is going to become, the new football when we look at how we negotiate with our teacher educator associations in terms of what that COLA looks like for next year.
Thank you, Maggie. Next, we have Jeff Harris, Superintendent in the Del Newark Unified School District.
So thank you, Troy. I'll just kind of echo what Tom and Maggie said. It's really critical that we take a hard look at the base, because from our perspective, the base really is, what are the base programs we're going to be providing students? And as we look at increasing costs, just with energy, with gas, inflation, purchasing, the lack of supplies given the supply chain, more and more, our base programs are pinched. Our ability to provide services above and beyond are becoming stretched thinner and thinner. And we know that students are exhibiting significant mental health, academic, social emotional deficits, as are their families. And when we start looking at how do we approach equity, how do we approach ensuring that every child has what they need to move ahead, it's going to take more, not less. And although a small COLA to the LCFF base helps, what it doesn't do is it does not keep pace with those increased costs and allow us to do more for our students. Our students need more, they deserve more. And so attacking that base as kind of that minimal funding for student services is essential to almost any conversation that's had. I can't stress enough when districts, county offices take a look at how we're addressing the needs of kids, the base is overlooked in light of other monies that are coming in. But the reality is the base is the core of what public schools have to offer our students.
Thank you, Jeff. And now we'll move on to Darshan Patel from Poway Usd.
Yes, hello. Poway Unified School District is a district in San Diego, unified. We serve 35,000 students and employ over 4,000 employees. We, as I said before, we're a large suburban school district. We are the lowest funded unified school district in San Diego County, with only around 22% of our students being receiving supplemental and none receiving concentration. So when we look at funding to meet the needs of our students, we're really looking at base funding. As we know, when we were quote unquote fully funded at the base, it still was insufficient. California is one of the lowest funded public school systems in the United States. And we know that base funding was never sufficient to meet the needs of our students. So when we're looking at the budget and budget surpluses that we're seeing right now, our communities are expecting for us to be able to do more for our students and meet the mandatory required needs in our communities. So we were receiving one of the lowest batches of COVID relief funding. And with that, we were able to contract out some additional services for student mental health and for supplemental instruction. But those were one-time dollars. And if we want to have long-term solutions to the gaps that COVID has created and to the challenges that COVID has created, we will need ongoing funding, and we will need to make sure that comes in through the base so that we can address the needs of all of our students. So we are very strongly supportive of CSBA and its advocacy for the legislature and the governor to invest heavily in LCFF base to ensure that schools can meet all of the rising costs, remain competitive in attracting and retaining high quality students or retaining high quality staff, and most importantly, improve student well-being and academic outcomes. The current COLA will not meet those needs. And in fact, if we don't find other ways of meeting rising cost of pension, as well as health insurance costs and identification of students with disabilities, we're going to fall even further behind than we already are. So please, let's fully fund the base and put any extra revenues towards that base.
Thank you. I think the need for higher base funding came through loud and clear in those presentations. And now we'll move on to the next topic, pension relief. Leading off on that, we have Robert Garcia of the Jurupa Unified School District.
Thank you, Troy, and thanks everyone for being here. As we all know, employer contributions to pensions are crippling districts across California, especially even here in Jurupa. Over the past year, STRS has increased from 16.9% to 19%, and PERS almost 23% to a little over 25%. And that equates to 2.7 million and 1.2 million respectively. And as President Heredia said earlier, all these increases impact all other educational programs. And in addition to other unfunded mandates, it puts further strain on our districts, on our district and others. So, and as Ms. Patel just said, with the budget surplus, we're really looking for some relief here in the governor's revise. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And now we have Maggie Beauvais-LaMonica.
Yeah, thanks. When we look at our pension cost in our school district, things have tripled almost since 2017. When you're talking with that very small budget that we're looking at, with over 92% of our funds being dedicated to salaries and retirement services, it's a smaller decreasing pot for actual programs that we're trying to do with social emotional needs for our students, increasing litigation costs around special education, increasing needs around special education. And so without more support from the governor's office and from the governor's budget on pension relief, even continuing the support and the relief that we were given in this current year, the state assistance this year was critical for us to get through in the budget, and we need additional support from the state in order to make ends meet and to make programs that meet the needs of our kids.
Thank you, Maggie. I think it's apparent how rising employer pension contribution costs are an issue which chips away at the resources that school districts and county offices have to devote to students. That's money that's diverted from the classroom. And this is a state-funded obligation. The state entered into these agreements, not local school districts. And so it's unfair that we're balancing these agreements, paying these debts that the state has incurred on the backs of local students. So thank you for making that point. We'll move on to the next topic, which is COVID ADA relief. First up on this topic is Tom Adams.
Again, thank you, Troy, for cueing me in on there. And this is a topic that is near and dear to all of us because we're all trying to figure out how to deal with declining enrollment. And what I'm really glad to know is CSBA and AXA actually have responded to it and emphasized the need to actually use 2019, 2020 as a base year in terms of calculating enrollment, because that was our last normal year, right? And certainly we may not return to normal, but if we're going to calculate ADA relief, it really has to start with that year. As well as I, that those years of COVID actually drove down attendance. Even recently in the most school year in 21, 22, In January with Omicron, we had 959 students out in 1 month in January. And that's out of 8,200 students because of Omicron. And that can't really be a good year to predict future enrollment or future attendance. The other thing I think we have to realize in all this is that this is an issue that we really have to listen to the experts. And the experts, the most knowledgeable people about ADA relief are going to be our two organizations, CSBA and AXA. The legislature should be listening to them about what we can actually do and what is the reality within our school districts.
Thank you, Tom. Next up, we have Jeannie Fernandez from the West Sonoma County Union High School District.
Thank you so much, Troy, and thank you to our attendees for being here today. This is such a vital day for us, and the fact that we need to get the information out to the public who, in many cases, just has absolutely no idea with what we're actually dealing with in our school districts. I come from a school district that is a small single school high school district with a small continuation high school district. We have currently this year 1,664 students. In last year, we had 1,822 students. We are down 9%, which is not as high as what poor Maggie dealt with in Hermosa Beach, but still above average for most of the state. And if we were to have to use this year's dollars for next year, or this year's student ADA count for next year's dollars, you could see it would be a world of hurt for our school district. So we really would appreciate that the legislature listen to CSBA and listen to AXA and listen to us school board trustees and superintendents that are struggling mightily out here with our budgets and have such declining enrollment. It's kind of, it's overwhelming when you look at it. We just cannot make do. And if we have to only get the money that's based on our students from this year, we will struggle to balance a budget. So we're absolutely encouraging and just, we can't stress it enough that we really hope that the legislature listens to the CSBA proposal to using our current enrollment numbers from the 2019 to in 2020, which was our last, real year. Thank you so much.
And Troy, if I could just add, let's have a formula that rewards us for what we were supposed to do, which was testing, contact tracing, and quarantining our students when they got COVID. And the current formulation won't reward us for our good behavior during the pandemic. And let's also send the signal that we want our students to come to school when they're healthy, not when they have COVID.
Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Tom. That last point regarding safety and what schools were asked to do during the pandemic is especially relevant. And I appreciate the both of you underlining the urgency of this topic and how it contributes to this fiscal cliff that some of our schools are facing. And so it is a very timely matter, and we hope that this is addressed appropriately in the May revise. The next topic we're going to discuss is transportation, specifically home to school transportation. And on that topic, our leadoff is Jeannie Fernandez.
Thank you so much, Troy. I know you all just heard me talk about the numbers that we have in our school district. I think you're going to find what I'm going to tell you next is kind of horrifying when you look at our basically fairly small single high school district. We have a LCFF budget of $19,584,872. Our home to school transportation costs are $1,421,789. And here's the most horrific number. We receive $530,435 from the state to transport our students. It is 2 times less than what our costs are, 2 times. and we only transport about 400 students. We have one area that we don't even transport, the area that's closest to our high school center. We've told those parents, you're going to have to get your kids there however you can, and let's hope they come. So we unfortunately are spending a lot of money to transport 400 students. $1,421,000. It's astronomical. We desperately need the state to help us with Assembly Bill 2933, which will provide school districts with the funding and flexibility to best serve our students without taking away from other programs, because that's what happens. If we want our kids to come to school, we have to pay the price. Our district is 323 square miles. And I just told you we are a single high school district. That tells you we encompass a very large area. We go all the way to the coast off of Sonoma County and go all the way up north on the coast and into the hills and the woods. And we have kids that travel a long way on a school bus, and they would not come to school if we didn't provide transportation. With the dual working family that we all know of the 21st century, parents have to leave to go to school before our kids have to, parents have to leave to go to work before our kids have to leave to go to school. And there isn't a place for the parents to drop their kids off at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we already have started the late start mandate from the state at 8:30. So we really struggle with what do we do but transport our students. We really have no choice. And we really need the legislature and the governor to step up, pay 100% of what it is that we pay in our costs, and give us COLA. Many of you don't understand that these numbers that we get, the $530,000 that my school district gets, is what we got in 1982. And it's never changed. It's never received a COLA. It's just what the numbers are. And if you are a new school district and you started, wanting to try to bus kids in the last 20 years, there's no money in the pot to be able for you to even be able to do that. You can't participate in transportation. Thank you so much, Troy.
Thank you, Jeannie. Next up, we have Robert.
Thank you, Troy. Now, obviously, transportation is an issue with a lot of us here. And since LCFF, the COLA hasn't been funded, and that's like 9 years worth of COLA, and it'd be nice if we could get that money back. In Jurupa, we have CNG buses that we purchased probably 15 years ago, and they're all at the same time, and they're starting to break down. And so we're also looking at electric buses, and we've got a couple already, but we're looking at replacing some of the CNG buses, but we can't necessarily just go all electric because we have field trips going up the mountain and stuff like that. So it really presents a challenge. And as Ms. Fernandez said, the COLA hasn't really been funded, and that's really a big stickler for us. And the late start, we've had to hire more bus drivers and rearrange schedules so that we can get students to school. So that's something that I hope, that we all hope, I think, that the governor and the legislature will help us on. Thank you, Troy.
Thank you. And finally, on this topic, we have Jeff Harris.
Thanks, Troy. So for those who aren't familiar with Del Norte County, we are the northwesternmost county in California. We are fully 2 hours from any other suburban area, and we're actually closer to Portland than we are to Sacramento. Kind of like Jeannie said, we're a pretty large landmass. We have, as a school district, we're a single district county, so I am both the appointed district superintendent and the elected county superintendent. So when I say we have a single high school, comprehensive high school in our district, that's the only high school in the county. Again, just over 1,200 square miles that we have to provide transportation for students to come to that central location. We bus about 750 students. Some of our students get on the bus as early as 2.5 to 3 hours before school starts, just to be able to ride that bus through all of the stops. Because again, over the years, we haven't been able to fund transportation as fully as we would have liked, which means that some of our drivers are running dual routes. They're running the longest routes possible because we don't have the funds to be able to adjust what we're currently doing. But like Jeannie said too, and I'll use the word, it's a little obscene how much of the budget has had to be pulled out of general fund to maintain home to school transportation. We are a little higher than the state average of about 10% taking the bus to school. We have about 22% of our overall student body who takes the bus. And we serve 3 outlying communities, one very near the Oregon state line, one up in the mountains east of town, and one on the Yurok tribal lands to the south of Crescent City. Again, a lot of planning, a lot of, I think Jeannie had said, our public really doesn't know what goes on. There's a lot of behind the scenes costs that go into whether it's fuel, whether it's bus replacement, whether it's even the ability to be able to hire mechanics to work on those buses, or the turnover of drivers, because it's a very demanding job. And with the inability to fully fund home to school transportation, we're also impacting what our students arrive to. Our transportation costs roughly $2 million a year. The state funds just over $700,000 of that $2 million, which means that the district is paying roughly 65% of all transportation costs. And again, this does not include field trips. It does not include college visits. It doesn't include anything, just home to school transportation. And that also equates to about 6.5% of the entire district budget. When you put that in terms of what we could do for children, that is roughly 12 additional teacher-led classrooms where we could reduce class sizes. That is the ability to provide additional counseling services. That is the ability to upgrade school facilities, to buy new furniture. All kinds of things that our students need and deserve. But we have to have transportation. Otherwise, many of our students would not be able to come to their school of residence, to come to our comprehensive high school, to attend our continuation school, community schools. It would be impossible for some of our families to be able to self-fund and provide transportation for their children. It's an absolute necessity, and I think it deserves to be high on the list of priorities for the governor and legislature as they move into this budget cycle.
Thank you. That was powerful testimony from all of the speakers. A lot of people are shocked to find out that only 10% of students statewide take the bus to school, but that's the legacy of 40 years of disinvestment from home to school transportation funding when schools are still getting funded at 1981, 1982 levels here in 2022. So it's important that the legislature take action to pass a bill like AB 2933, which provides full funding for all reimbursable home to school transportation costs with a COLA, and it allows kids to get to school on time at a point in our history when it's never been more critical to get kids in school so they have access to instruction and the services they need as we're recovering from a pandemic. Our last topic for today before we move to the question and answer session is about TK-12 facilities, particularly those for universal transitional kindergarten. And our first speaker on that topic is Darshan Patel.
Yeah, so as a trustee, I'm one of those rare birds that actually has a strong interest in facilities. My father was a civil engineer, and I served on our community planning board for several years while I have been on the school board here in Poway Unified. So let me speak to you a little bit about TK funding. So what we have is we have a system. It's much anticipated by our community. Our community is very excited about it. The governor has spoken very positively about early education. But the challenge is his funding so far is really geared towards staffing and not towards facilities. So as schools look ahead to the expansion of transitional kindergarten, funding is needed to ensure that schools have adequate facilities and how to house and serve these students. Additional funding flexibility will be critical to ensuring that our school districts can just simply fulfill the state's goals for TK expansion and serve these hundreds, if not thousands, of new students coming into each of our districts. So the governor does propose a certain amount of additional school facilities funding over the next 2 years, but much more is needed than what he has proposed as school districts race against the clock to construct and prepare all of our facilities. So some of you may realize that some classrooms with declining enrollment may just need modifications or modernizations, but several of them need complete overhauls, including adding bathrooms and buying new furniture that are height appropriate or size appropriate, as well as putting in new playground equipment. There are Title V requirements for all of these things that we must adhere to, and all of that costs money. And for example, in Poway Unified, we're going to start enrolling our TK kiddos this fall in a phased-in approach. And for our schools, we have 24 elementary schools in our school district. And what we'll see is an increase to about 1,000 kids in the coming fall. And that number will double as we bring in phase 3 in 3 years. We'll have nearly 2,000 kids in TK. That's a lot of additional facilities that we'll require. The specialized classrooms, the minimum square footage requirements, in-class restrooms, play yards, proximity to drop-off and loading areas, etc. We need a range, we need that cost to come in from the state because it's a state mandate. So as you know, school districts are open to pass bonds, but what we know in this economy and with the way things are going with personal incomes, there's not much of an appetite to fund bonds from communities. And since this is a state mandate, it really should be state funded. Even if a school district could pass a bond in 2 or 3 years, that money does not come in soon enough to meet the needs now. Furthermore, that facilities funding is matching funding. And that matching funding often gets prioritized to school districts of, it's grant-based and need-based. There's not enough time to float these bonds in the current economic state, and we really need that state funding to come in. CSBA is pushing for additional non-Proposition 98 general fund money, and that is very critical to understand. If it comes from Proposition 98, essentially we're paying for that facility funding ourselves. So it needs to be non-Prop 98 general fund money to construct facilities for our TK students and accommodate the program's reduced class size ratios. For example, 12 adults to 1 student is what's being proposed. And for an amendment allowing LEAs to access 100% of state funding until those districts can pass those local bonds. Additionally, because the current budget cycle shows that we've reached the state appropriations limit and Prop 4 allows capital outlay as an exemption, it would seem like an ideal solution to increase facilities fundings non-Prop 98 to cover school district facilities costs to implement the universal TK program that the governor has mandated. So we would really like the governor to take a hard look at this and make some really rational, practical decisions that will help us meet the needs of our students in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshana. And our last speaker is Jeff Harris.
And the only thing I want to add, Darshan did a phenomenal job there. But I just also want to point out that about 2/3 of all school districts in the state are small school districts. And so when we start talking about matching funds, when we start talking about having to go back and retrofit classrooms and even bring in a portable classroom, those what seem to be maybe simple ideas are well outside of the fiscal realities that those small school districts are also able to realize. And so not only is it going to affect larger urban and suburban districts, but there could also be a significant disproportional impact on those smaller school districts throughout the state. So thank you, Troy.
That's great information all around. I think everyone's excited about the potential for UTK. to provide a bridge between preschool and kindergarten and get kids off to a stronger start. But it's not just enough to have a good idea. We have to do it right and implement correctly and provide school districts and county offices of education the support they need to pull that off. So I thank everyone today for their commentary on this wide array of subjects, really setting the table for the May revise. Of course, CSBA will have more perspective after the revise is actually announced, and we can see how our priorities have been reflected in that budget that the governor will be presenting on Friday. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, so we will conclude this event. But thank you to everybody who joined, and we will send out a recording of this so you can refer to that. Those of you who are in the press, feel free to contact me or to use snippets from this video in your articles, and we're happy to facilitate that. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.